What is something you opted out of that went horribly wrong for those that went through with it? The Cave Creek disaster. 14 people died when a viewing platform collapsed. It took 2 hours for the first responders to get there, which was no fault of theirs. It was simply rough terrain and isolated. 2 of my mates died there, and I was meant to go, but was hungover as hell. I worked with the engineer who designed the platform about 3 years later, and the poor guy still believed it was his fault. Which it wasn't. He designed it perfectly. The workers who constructed it used the wrong size bolts. I live in Aurora, Co, and I was planning on going to the showing of The Dark Knight. Not that I opted out, but my car battery died that night and I couldn't drive there. I thank my lucky stars that I was not involved, and I'm terrified that I could have possibly died. Not me, but back in the early 80s my dad was diagnosed with leukemia. I don't have all details correct, but the gist of it is, him along with several other people with the same affliction, were given the choice to undergo the traditional method of treatment involving bone marrow transplants and whatnot, or go through with some kind of newer experimental version of chemotherapy. Out of the group of around 10 people, him and a Catholic priest chose chemo, while the others chose the bone marrow transplants. My father and the priest were the only ones to survive. Company I worked for, large multinational, relocated the division headquarters from where they had moved me 5 years before to a shithole city. They called it a lateral move, so there would be no pay increase. I took the severance package and negotiated 6 additional months of work to train my replacements. During the 6 months I also got to attend a major user conference on the company expense bonus. With 2 months left in my tenure, they announced they were dissolving the division and selling off the resources. Most of my co-workers were left unemployed in a new city with no connections or prospects. I, on the other hand, stopped working on my designated day, a Friday, and started working my next job, for more money, the next Monday, with a nice fat severance check arriving 4 weeks later. When I was in grade school, my friends and I used to play stickball in a horse arena. It was basically baseball, but with a shitty stick and a tennis ball. Anyway, one day my friends brought a real baseball bat and a real hard ball to play with. They wanted me to play catcher. Having played catcher a lot in a local little league, I knew that without the padding and mask, this was dangerous. I refused to play catcher, and my brother friends gave me shit. Damn it, don't be such a pussy, etc. One of my brother's friends decided that he would play catcher, since I was too scared. My brother was the pitcher. On the very first pitch, which was pretty fast, my friend who was batting, swung at the ball, and clipped the ball just slightly on the bottom of the ball to change its trajectory. The ball went right over the catcher's glove, and nailed my brother's friend right in the mouth, knocking out his 2 front teeth, and making him bleed everywhere. If I hadn't been such a pussy, that could have been me with the knocked out teeth. Nobody gave me shit for not wanting to play catcher after that. Not me, but my parents. They had planned a trip to Virginia Beach with a close friend of theirs. They were to take a small plane down, spend a few days, then fly back. My uncle jet for a local radio station at the time, and was given a few tickets to see The Who. He offered his spares to my mom and dad, who accepted even though it was the same weekend as the planned beach trip. Their friend ended up going, but the flight back never made it. The pilot was advised not to depart, as there was severe weather along his flight path, but he went for it anyways. The plane crashed with no survivors. If it weren't for them deciding to go see The Who, I wouldn't be here. I'm named after the friend that died, and was coincidentally born a year after the day they found out. A group of my friends were smoking synthetic marijuana at a party in the days where it was a new thing, and hadn't made the news for the adverse effects it causes. I turned it down because I had college the next day and had to go home and rest up. I heard the next day that 2 of my buddies had ended up in hospital, having suffered seizures, and the third had suffered temporary heart problems. I was doing one of those really famous obstacle course mud races. Got to an obstacle that involved jumping off a 15-foot platform into muddy water. I climbed to the top, took one look down, and freaked out. There was no way to tell how deep the water was because it was so muddy, and here were people smiling and doing flips off the platform into the water. I had tears running down my face from the panic, so I climbed down and ran around it. A few hours after my heat, a guy died on that obstacle due to accidental drowning. He went down and didn't come back up and just simply went unnoticed in the excitement and energy of the crowd, which was my fear to begin with. A family was out making their first tandem skydive together at my home drop zone. The girl, I'll call her Lucky, had just turned 18 and she wanted to do a skydive, but didn't want to go first once she arrived at the drop zone. In addition to Lucky, her grandmother, the 75-year-old Claudette, wanted to skydive to check it off her bucket list. I skydived out of this small drop zone north of Las Vegas. It had one Cessna 182 and one tandem instructor at times. Because of this, only one person could go on a tandem jump that day. Lucky was too scared to go at first, so Claudette opted to go in her granddaughter's place to show her that everything would be alright. Everything went fine on the free fall portion of the skydive, but when the parachute opened there was some sort of malfunction. The main canopy got tangled up somehow with the reserve and sent Claudette and her tandem skydiving instructor, my friend James Beck, plummeting towards Earth at a high rate of speed. James was unable to get the parachute opened and they impacted the ground. James, the hero that he was, put his back towards the ground to receive the full impact of the blow. He was trying to save Claudette. Sadly, she would pass away shortly thereafter. As sad as this is, I always think that fate, luck, or whatever you want to call it, put Claudette in the plane that day to save the life of Lucky. You might not believe this, so here's the link to the story. A couple of friends from college wanted to go camping one weekend. It sounded fun, so I asked my folks if I could borrow a tent and some supplies, as we were big campers when I was young and my friend didn't have a tent. It gets closer to the time, and the situation changes to a hike before camping and doing it late in the evening after work to a campground that none of us had ever been to. I knew that the forest gets dark at least an hour earlier than open sky because of all the trees. I ended up deciding not to go as it just didn't sound like a good idea to me. Come to find out later, they went anyways, and my friend's dog, who has a problem stomach, got sick and had diarrhea in the tent that night. That would have been my tent. Last year was my first year as a Northeastern student. The Boston Marathon was going on about a mile away, and my friend messaged me asking if I was still planning on going to see the finish line with them, because it was Patriots Day and we had no class. Fortunately, I was a lazy fuck and decided I'd rather take a nap than follow through on my plans with friends. Turns out my friends ended up not going when I decided not to meet up with them. I woke up to the sound of dozens of emergency vehicle sirens driving past. In Boy Scouts, I was supposed to be the acting senior patrol leader for the week-long summer camp. I was going for my Eagle at the time, and this trip was meant to prove my leadership skills beyond my project. I got pneumonia a couple weeks before the trip and had to pull out. On that trip, there were two very serious incidents that I would not have been able to prevent that would have been blamed on me. First, one of the scouts threw an aerosol can into the fire. No one there was brave enough to fish it out with a stick, so they all ran and hid. It turns out that the scout master was driving into camp about that time. He pulled up to the campsite, stepped out of his jeep, and as he walked over to the fire, the can exploded. A few days after that, a couple scouts, both older than me, decided to use a spare tent to practice knife throwing. They completely ruined a big canvas tent. It's the only time that coughing so hard that it makes me vomit has ever felt like dodging a bullet. This lady was once handing out a few letters at my high school graduation, and I happened to get one. It was a letter for a job opportunity at Vector Marketing, and I thought it'd be a pretty cool thing to try. It offered $18/HR for work that summer, and since I didn't have a job, I thought I'd sign up for an interview. But after doing some research online, I found out that the job is a complete scam. Basically, they hire you as a door-to-door salesman who sells massively overpriced knives, like $1,000 for a set. They train you for 18 hours, unpaid, 6 hours a day, 3 days of training, to show you how to use the knives and how to sell them. Then, you go door to door and offer to show your product in an hour-long sales presentation thing. You get your $18/HR if the person signs a form saying you've presented them the knives for an hour. You may think this system is really easy to beat, Just tell your friends to sign forms and then collect your $18/HR. However, if you don't sell any knives, then it reflects on your performance. They'll call you a bad salesman. They'll require you to do more training. There goes your possible resume resource. And not only that, but after doing some more research somewhere, I found out that the knives are only worth like $50. They expect and even recommend during your training to try to sell it to friends/family. Why? Because grandma will buy her cute grandkid's knife set, which she doesn't even need, for $1,000. So you may think, there are some kids who of course lie, get paid for a few hours, collect their money, and then they get fired. But for every kid that got his grandma to buy a set, the company just profited like $900 instantly. When I was around 13 or 14, I used to walk a couple of dogs around my village on the afternoons. There was a cycle path to a neighboring village that I often took as it ended in a park, but on this one specific day, the dogs refused to go past the bridge halfway down. When I was younger, my father warned me not to stand underneath this bridge as a car had crashed through the barrier in the past. Of all the weird stuff he could warn me about, but hey, and I therefore wanted to get out of the crash zone as it were. Instead of fighting with the dogs, I turned round and went the other way. A man shot himself just around the corner from the bridge around the time we were there. Not me, but my dad. He grew up in a rougher area of town. Basically his childhood reads like an S.E. Hinton book. Well, him and his best friend are at a party and my dad decides to leave to hang out with this girl. Never sees his best friend again. All winter his friend is missing, and assumed a runaway until spring comes, and they find his body in a stack of tires in a storage yard. Apparently my dad and his friend had pissed these two dudes off. Coincidentally, the two suspects die within a year of the body being discovered. One by a house fire and the other carbon monoxide poisoning. Karma is a bitch. Edit. I just want to make it clear that my dad did not go on a revenge-fueled mission a la Liam Neeson. These guys died in different parts of the country and I love my dad, but no, he is not a criminal mastermind. I think he didn't find out about one of them dying until years after. I know the Reddit happy ending is what you all were hoping for, but the reality of it is that these two assholes probably died at their own hands. A few years ago, when I was just starting out at my first job out of high school, part-time minimum wage, the works, my friend came to me with a great idea he had for a living situation. A nearby 5-bedroom house with lots of space that would be great for parties, and it would be super affordable, since rent would be split 6 ways. I opted out, because I didn't have a car, and there were no buses in the area. My friend really wanted this house, so he kept asking around to any friends of friends that were looking to move. He thought he had gotten a pretty good group of people together, and he only didn't know 2 of the people, so it seemed okay at first. I went over there for parties every now and then, and every time I went there, I heard about something new going wrong. First, one of the guys living there was a quiet, solitary type who wanted out as soon as he realized that he basically moved into a frat house with people he didn't know. The other roommate that was kind of outside of our friend group had a string of emergencies that prevented her from paying rent, which meant that everyone else there had to throw down even more to make ends meet. One of my friends, already starting to get into debt, moved back in with his parents and kept trying to get his money back from everyone else who was in the same situation and didn't have any money to give. After most of the people had left, my friend had to get more friends of friends to live there in order to get through the rest of the lease. There were a lot of people trashing the house on a regular basis, including people that lived there and didn't have jobs, but refused to do any cleaning, and the people who had jobs were working so much to pay for everything that the house just went to shit. Quite literally, they had a very misbehaved dog that shat in the house. After their second set of roommates ended up being total assholes or having medical issues that forced them to move out, the year-long lease was finally up, and even after spending a week of solid cleaning and fixing things themselves, they still didn't get any of their security deposit back because parts of the house had gotten so jacked up. As I was helping my friends clean the house, they asked me, "Want to move in with us into a 4-bedroom house in the next town over?" I said no politely, and, again, watched things get worse for them all over at their new house. This didn't happen to me, but to a lady I met. She lived in Seattle in the 70s when she was a teenager. At a local lake, she met this good-looking, smart and super charming guy. They talked for a while, and he asked her if she would have dinner with him that night. She eagerly said yes. But when the guy showed up at her house, her father took one look at him and locked the door, forbidding his daughter from going out with him. She was mortified and furious. She remained resentful until a few months later, when she opened the newspaper and saw the charming guy's smiling face on the front page. It was Ted Bundy. When I was around 8, my parents took my sister and I snow skiing for the first time. It was toward the end of the day and they all wanted to go on one last run before we left. I was whining to my mom that I didn't want to go because I had to pee. They tried to talk me into it, but apparently I was being really unbearable about it. So my parents roll their eyes and take us inside to pee. Turns out while I was peeing, the lift broke down and it started snowing pretty heavily. I don't remember how long it took before they got everyone off of the lift, but it was at least an hour. Being an annoying kid paid off that day. Oregon Trail, 3rd grade. My class played out the Oregon Trail game, and at the end we had to decide if we were going to take our families over the mountains at the beginning of winter. I was the only person in my wagon train who didn't want to risk the storms. Even my assigned wife wanted to run for it. She was my best friend until that day when we were each handed tombstones with our names on them. Thanks Heather. Now I'm a husk of a person, while my regret-filled soul is forever haunting the past. On a road trip, everyone stopped at a Sonic and got burgers. I didn't get anything because I didn't want to be too gassy in the car. Everyone got terrible food poisoning. Except me.